Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to be going over another episode of The New Yorker dealing with the Ukraine and Israeli conflicts. So let's begin here. This video is going to be going from a Beijing perspective dealing with the Ukrainian war. This is by DW.
Professor of International Relations at the University of Hong Kong, and he's recently returned to China after many years in the United States, so a close observer of the Chinese-US relationship. Professor Lee, thanks very much for talking to DW here at the Munich Security Conference. Let's start by talking about China's position here at the conference. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, was here this weekend. He was also here last year when he brought along the famous Chinese position paper, so sometimes called a peace plan for dealing with the war in Ukraine. Now, a year later, he didn't have any new paper to bring. Nothing much has really moved in that conflict. What does that tell us about the state of this war?
Well, the things change, and particularly U.S.-China relation has changed. Because last year, that when Wang Yi came, there was just a blue incident. The so-called spy room incident, later found out it's not a spy in the room.
Well, that's debated and disputed still.
But the government said it's not a spy room. This is not from the Chinese state, like the government. So I think that he is a much better move, and also that China's president and the U.S. president just had a meeting a few months ago in San Francisco. It does not mean that U.S.-China relations really profoundly changed, but at least they found the floor to discuss. So less confrontational. So that's one background. But secondly, certainly, it's not so easy to resolve the Ukraine the war. I think China realized that, but of course, the international community also realized that the difficulties at the moment. But on top of that, there's also Israel-Hamas war going on. So certainly, the international atmosphere is also getting very, very negative. The position paper by Munich Security Council certainly talk about lose-lose that reflects the atmosphere in the moment.
So lots to break down there, but let's talk first a little bit more about China's position on the Ukraine war. Because in that position paper, which I think is still considered to be kind of valid as describing China's position, the very first point is that it says that China believes that the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of every country has to be respected. And when you refer to that again today, with a clear reference to Ukraine, that Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity needs to be respected. So does that mean that China believes that its territorial integrity should be restored as part of any resolution to the war?
Well, certainly from day one, China talked about the importance of sovereignty. And also China maintained good relationship with Ukraine, despite that also China has a very good relationship with Russia. So that's China's interesting position. That's also from the beginning that China believes that they can play a positive role in terms of a negotiation table. But the whole thing has turned out to be not that it's far more complicated than anyone can realize. But in terms of emphasis on sovereignty, emphasize China's interest to see peace rather than continue a war in Russia and Ukraine. I think that's the position China has not changed.
But I just want to pin you down, though, on this question of territorial integrity, because, of course, Russia has claimed that it has annexed now 4 Ukrainian regions, that they are now part of Russia. China has not recognized those claims. So would China then expect, as part of any resolution, that those 4 regions would be returned to Ukraine?
Well, but also, in addition to China's position, but also China talk about the NATO expansion. They think that the next NATO expansion is a part of the reason that interpret Russia's behavior. So we do need to see that these 2 parts. On one hand, China talk about sovereignty. China, in many ways, maintain a relationship with Ukraine. But at the same time, China is not really neutral in that position.
But may I just, let's talk about NATO in a moment. But just to be specific, do you think that China would expect Ukraine's territorial integrity to be restored for those regions, and presumably also Crimea, whose attachment to Russia has also not been recognized by China? Would those be restored to Ukraine?
Well, again, this is an extremely complicated issue. It depends on how you define the sovereignty, how you look at the history, because different people have different interpretations.
Well, it's not that complicated. I mean, the territorial boundaries of Ukraine as a sovereign country have been internationally recognized, including by China.
Well, that's true, but also when China early on emphasized the point, also make a point that the Taiwan is a different issue. Taiwan is part of China. If you really acknowledge its sovereignty, the Western world also should acknowledge China's, kind of sovereign rights over Taiwan. This is China's position, where China comes from. And but of course, the Western world do not necessarily accept that.
Yeah, but maybe we can come to Taiwan. But I still haven't got a clear answer from you. I want to understand. Like the first point of the position paper is that the territorial integrity of all countries has to be respected. But you are not willing to say that that means that those regions of Ukraine which have been supposedly annexed by Russia would be returned to Ukraine.
Well, again, that China's position. I'm not defending a Chinese position. I just try to interpret what that really means. But at the moment, that certainly China talk about the important sovereignty, but China does not blame Russia in that regard publicly, because the reason is they refuse to do that, partly because they think that you should go back to NATO expansion because Russia's behavior. So that's China's package, and I cannot separate just only talk about one thing. But on the other hand, China was sincere, hoping that they can resolve the problem. But in light of the current situation, we do not know whether this is China's position paper or China's initiative, and whether it really can work or not. We do not know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really just trying to understand China's position. So, okay, let's move on from territorial integrity to this question of another point in the plan, which says that the legitimate security concerns of different countries have to be respected. And I think this is reference to Russia's complaints about NATO expansion. So do you believe that NATO expansion, or do you think China believes that NATO expansion should be reversed, that the new members of NATO should now leave NATO?
Well, I don't think that China can clearly make that statement. This will offend a lot of people.
Yeah, but I'm trying to understand.
I think that China is very clear. China opposes so-called the East Asia version of NATO, because NATO now try to establish an office in Japan and etc. So China deeply worried about what happened. It's also will move to East Asia.
Yeah, but that office in Japan is not happening. The French blocked that. But we're talking about NATO expansion in Europe. And of course, I'm sure the countries like Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania would not be delighted to be told by China that they should leave NATO. But I just want to understand, if you think the expansion of NATO was the problem, then what would be China's desire? Like to see NATO unwound and just end or something?
Well, I think that China is in a huge dilemma. On the one hand, China does not want to see Russia completely defeated, because based on the current Chinese understanding, the U.S. strategy already put China as the most formidable enemy. With Russia is gone, the next one will be China. Will focus on China. This will expand China's strategic dilemma or China's strategic interest in that regard. But at the same time, in many ways, that China also caught up in a terrible situation with the Russia-Ukraine war. China did not benefit from that, because you can see the clear blocks that the U.S.-led coalition become very, very active, and China is on the other block. China is not willing to see that what had happened, but in a way, the so-called authoritarianism with democracy unfolding in a way is against China's interest. So this is China's concern.
But isn't it clear that China could actually, help to bring about an end to this war pretty quickly if it just put pressure on Vladimir Putin? I mean, Russia is extremely dependent now on China. China has enormous leverage over Russia's actions.
Well, I think you have a good observation. But on the other hand, I mean, anyone can control Russia or influence Putin is always limited, because China and Russia have to go together at this current moment. But of course, sadly, in a way, sometimes what you want to achieve, China wants to maintain as a responsible member in the international community, not only just the so-called BRICS country, but also with the G20, with APEC, and with other countries. Any international organization that is not against China, China wants to be part of that. But unfortunately, now you can see China-Russia relation become closer and closer. But what's really the driving force? Different people have different say. Chinese leaders think that we are pushed in that direction. When Xi Jinping talked about the major power relations, he referred to the United States, not to refer to Russia. And also Xi Jinping sent his daughter to Harvard, not to Russia, not to Moscow University. That speaks loud about the 12 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah, that does speak volumes, doesn't it? But I just want to return to this question that if this war is causing such problems for China, and China can also see that essentially this is a major breach of sovereignty and territorial integrity, why doesn't it just say to Putin, sorry, you've got to stop this. We need the world to return to some stability?
Well, I do not know what they really discuss privately, but the earlier I already explained, China is in a huge dilemma because on one hand, you look at the U.S. strategy framework, we already identify China as the most formidable enemy. So now, if Russia is completely defeated, then the next one will be China. This is Chinese mindset. So that explains their hesitance. But China does not support militarily for Russia. They probably support economically or in other channels. In many ways, China comply some of the sanctions. I think that's probably it's quite real because at least the U.S. side not complain too much in that regard.
What do you think people in Beijing will be thinking about the death of Alexei Navalny? I mean, this is obviously really overshadowed the conference here. What goes through minds in Beijing when they see that?
Certainly, I think that they also, it depends on who you ask. And of course, this is the timing of this death and the tragic nature certainly got a lot of people's attention. And but on the other hand, it depends on who you ask, what the position, because in terms of how you look at Russia, how you look at Putin.
My quick analysis of this, right? My first impression is that the Chinese would prefer the United States to be funding Ukraine and be busy in Europe and have less ability to focus on the Asian theater. So yes, the Chinese are more aligned with Russia, but they're more aligned with keep the Americans busy in Europe. Now, they say on the international stage that they want some sort of peace agreement, but they are more aligned to Russia. Now, what is going to be interesting here is that from the previous video, we talked about the rearmament of European nations, especially Germany, and how Berlin is starting to move into more military production. So what will happen is the European nations will constitute and they will have more military prowess over time. Now, that may be part of a strengthening of NATO, that may be part of a weakening of NATO, and just something new that emerges from the European Union. We don't know yet. At least in the short term, it's probably strengthening NATO. That will not bode so well if NATO forces are actually deployed, not just in the European theater, but in another theater, such as the Middle East, or perhaps somehow, some way integrated in an Asian theater. So just keep that in mind, that it's not so simple as good guy, bad guy. The Chinese wants the United States to be bogged down in another area of the world. So it's a two-front war, which is something that we should have applied on China. See, we should have been allied to Russia to have a two-front war with China instead of a two-front war fighting in the European theater and in the Asian theater.
Chinese society is very, very divided.
And just one last question relating to also Russia, Ukraine. Ukraine obviously would like to join NATO as part of any resolution at the end of this war. Obviously, that's going to be a major discussion point in negotiations. What would China's view on that be? Probably, I assume, taking from what you're saying, China would not like to see NATO get even bigger.
Well, I think that by the logic just I mentioned, you can see that direction. But at the same time, it's not it will be unwise for China to make it very publicly. What China wanted to do is to maintain good relation with some EU countries, and because it's partly for economic reason. And
because
China,
what is China doing? China is trying to expand its economic prowess to other countries, including Africa, including the Middle East, around the Asian Pacific Rim. And if there are regions that constitute with more military prowess that would be aligned with the United States, then that would mean that military operations against China could be more coordinated with the Allied forces in, let's say, in a World War III environment. And one of the economic strategies that China has is to kind of fracture relations with the United States and the rest of the world in transacting in US dollars to kind of strengthen other currencies like the yuan. So the Chinese yuan. So by doing that, by NATO constituting or some new European military apparatus starts to emerge, then blocs may be more trading with the Allied forces together than with this more fractured BRICS kind of environment that's emerging. So you don't want better relations with the United States and other countries. You want worse relations with the United States and other countries from an economic transactional point of view, from the perspective of the Chinese. Now, if the military industrial complex starts to build up in Europe, a big hand in providing weaponry for that is going to be the United States military industrial complex. So that those connections, those economic connections, are going to strengthen, not weaken.
That China does not want to be isolated. So I think in many ways, China probably wish to see that the Russia-Ukraine war come to an end. Then European country may have some other thoughts about the so-called bloc thinking, to block authoritarian democracy. But on the other hand, the U.S. elections also complicate the whole things, right? Because even without that factor, a lot of European countries deeply worry about Donald Trump's isolationism, etc. So that, again, added the complexity. So if Chinese leadership is wise, they probably will be quiet. They will not say what they really wanted to do.
Yeah, so let's look ahead to that election.
Chinese are going to be quiet and pragmatic. Please go to my store at the-studio-reykjavik.com and help support my work and your health by getting the Max 35. It is a great structural nano silver liquid. You take a teaspoon of this a day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or two a day, and it will neutralize pathogens. You swish it in your mouth, you swallow it, take it every day. To bring down inflammation, take turmeric. It's also an antioxidant. Get it at my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Ashwagandha root, control blood glucose levels, and that will reduce that inflammatory response because of high sugar level in your blood. D3 helps to absorb calcium, but it also is a gene expression cofactor. If you're low on D3, you won't have the proper gene expression. In addition, if you have an infected cell, D3 helps to get that cell into apoptosis. Magnesium and zinc. You should be taking this every day to boost your immune system. And resveratrol. It's also an antioxidant, and it helps to get rid of senescent cells, cells that stop dividing, and these cells that are just sitting there start to age and start to accumulate toxins. You want to get rid of them. Resveratrol helps with that. This is part of an anti-aging protocol. By getting rid of senescent cells and getting your stem cells to repopulate that tissue, over time what will happen is that tissue age is going to actually, in terms of telomere length, actually get younger, because the telomere lengths are going to be larger. Every time a cell divides, the telomeres get shorter to the point where it either goes to apoptosis or it'll go in senescence. These senescent cells build up toxins, and just the age of the tissue starts to increase. If you can get rid of those senescent cells and get your stem cells to start repopulating, the average telomere lengths with those new cells that came from those adult stem cells will bring down the average age of the tissue. That means that tissue is going to be working better. All right. So you have chronological age and you have biological age. And your biological age can be either more than your chronological age or equal to or less than your chronological age. So take my advice, get the resveratrol. It's part of the anti-aging protocol. When you're taking it with other things that I recommend, what's going to happen is that you are going to get more ATP, you're going to have healthier tissues, and you are going to age slower. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video and all my videos. Click the link and get the products. Back to the news.
See, that's going to have a huge impact on U.S.-China relations. What is China's thinking, do you feel, on this choice, Biden-Trump?
Well, for Biden, it's very much expected, and certainly China, under the Biden administration, U.S.-China relation has not really improved that much, and so that tells you two different parties, two different leaders. The policy for China largely continuity. That probably nothing to do with the individual leaders or nothing to do with the party, but more to do with the structured tensions, meaning that the U.S. feel that China become a real threat because it's a comprehensive power, different from the Cold War. The Soviet Union is only strong in military, but China is quite comparable in so many areas, militarily, technologically, economically, certainly. So that explains what I call the structural problem. And also U.S. domestic politics make China different political model or political system, economic model, also more sensitive to American public and etc. So in that regard, both parties try to be tough on China. So that was the atmosphere. China cannot change that much. China should understand that. But Biden is very much expected, and probably will not be completely decoupling, and Biden already abandoned that. And on the Taiwan policy, probably a continuation of the one China policy in principle, will not push too hard on that regard. But on the other hand, Biden improved the relation with European countries, the so-called like-minded country, that the way that unfold is not China's best interest. But for Trump, it's really uncertain in many ways. On the one hand, his isolationism, particularly regarding Taiwan, could be very much in China's best interest. And when he alienated the European allies, these countries probably will look at China in a different light. But on the other hand, we have to Chinese leadership also recognize the Republican Party become very, very conservative or even more ideological. So it could be very, very tough for China with or without Trump.
But you feel, I mean, just to pick up a couple of potential positives for China then from Trump would be potentially putting more space between the Europeans and the US, and then maybe backing off on Taiwan a little bit. I mean, where do you see the opportunities on Taiwan?
No, I don't think Trump himself will back Taiwan that much.
No, I mean backing off on Taiwan.
Backing off on Taiwan, yes. This is what China can say. But at the same time, almost for sure that Trump will increase the tariff in the trade relation with China, and that's certainly it's not good news for China. But relatively speaking, trade issues is not as important as security issue.
Yeah, but do you feel? I mean, some speculate that Trump would actually really like to do a kind of a grand bargain with Xi Jinping.
China's economic issues is their security issue.
Sit down like the two big leaders and work out some deal which may involve, him limiting U.S. support for Taiwan in return for some major deal on trade. Do you think that is plausible?
It is possible because there's a Chinese saying, if there's any problem could be resolved by money, it's not a big problem. This Chinese mindset, you know what I mean. But on the other hand, you do not know what the team Trump will form regarding policy for China. If we go back to Michael Pompeo, Peter Navarro, Steve Miller, Bannon, then it will be not good picture.
You recently, just like we mentioned, moved to Hong Kong after decades, in fact, in the United States. Tell us about that move. How did that, what was the motivation there, and what are your impressions of the state of the relationship between the US and China overall?
Well, this is a more personal decision. May or may not reflect many other things. But the one thing is that my job when I entered Brookings 17 years ago is try to be a bridge to engagement, to people-to-people exchanges, think tank to think tank dialogue. Now, still possible, become increasingly difficult. U.S. is not moved to.
We have too many think tanks, too many policy wonks, especially in the European theater, that are a bunch of Cold War relics, or still have Cold War mentality. Now, it's really simple with the Chinese in terms of American policy, that the way we should conduct our policy. It's a no-go for Taiwan. And we need to strengthen our ally connections with South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and some of the other Asian Pacific players. And China can't grow. And if they try to grow, we should destroy the Forbidden City so it no longer exists.
Engage with China, we talk about decouple, including educational, culture, even think tank decoupling, and etc. You see the U.S. Congress bills and many other things reflect that. So I'm a little bit worried. Now, Hong Kong is, in many ways, it's unique. It's still different from mainland China. It's a cosmopolitan city, and there's so many foreigners than any or entire country combined in China. So that gives some opportunity to do some more engagement, more dialogue, and formally or informally.
But I was recently in Beijing, actually, at a conference, and it's striking that virtually all of the conference delegates traveled there with burner phones, not taking their own phones, but taking dummy phones that they had to use temporarily because they're so concerned about Chinese digital spying.
Here's the problem with China. China is 1984 on steroids in terms of the power of the state and the surveillance of its citizens and improper speech or improper thinking. And if they are allowed to win in a World War III environment or economically, then there's going to be other countries around the world that will want to institute those types of policies in their governments. And that means worldwide totalitarianism, worldwide 1984. That can't happen. It's better to break the nest. It's better to destroy, so at least the future generations would not have the tyranny of 1984. That's why I keep on saying some wars are willing to fight for and others are not. The Ukrainian war is not worth fighting. What is worth fighting is making sure 1984 doesn't happen for 400 years if the Chinese win. So we got to make sure that doesn't happen. And another thing that is worth fighting for is making sure that Esau dies by the sword.
Risk that a lot of people just simply don't want to go in for anymore, including a lot of corporations.
Well, that certainly was the atmosphere. It's a little bit, it's too excessive, to be honest with you. I think.
Are you sure?
Well, I did that before.
You can't trust the
Chinese. Modern technology do not need to bring anything. A lot of ways they can find out the communication and etc. It's not uniquely Chinese. I would say no. I mean, I think they will live in a terrible period about the technology really so intrusive. This is almost everywhere.
But it certainly gave out some sort of digital Cold War vibes. I mean, just as
I do think that powers like the UK and the United States have a lot of capability and is using that capability against its citizens. But it's on steroids in China. All right. And both are wrong. And that's why I keep on saying, not only do we need to destroy China and make sure that 1984, with a communistic feel to it, we got to make sure that doesn't emerge. But we also have to destroy the national security state in the United States because they're not far off. So the enemy within China is the enemy within the United States. And that's that national security state hell-bent on giving you 1984.
No question in your reflections personally, but also structurally, is this now a new kind of Cold War era?
Well, in many ways, it's already, it is. But at the same time, will never be the same because the 40 years China's openness, you create many generations. They are very much internationally minded, and Chinese actually can travel abroad, and so that's a big difference. So this is also making me wonder how different China between China and Russia in many ways, and particularly the time when I grew up in China during the Cultural Revolution, during the Mao era, completely different because that time probably the whole country just have several hundred visas. But now, I mean, there's no problem to get visa. There's 100 million, 200 million people travel abroad. I mean, this kind of activities. There's no, very, very few, or even none of them defected. So that tells you a lot about the complexity of China. So sometimes our views a little bit too excessive, let me say, put that way. China did not deny some of the problems. I think the point, sadly, there are a lot of challenges about the civil society. That's a fact. But at the same time, I just do not want to give you kind of a situation. I think China needs to deal with that more open, let more foreigners visit China, particularly encourage student exchanges. And Xi Jinping made a commitment in San Francisco. China will attract 50,000 Americans in the next 5 years. If you have this kind of excessive situation, how can you attract so many American students? I think that it's a problem itself. It will be a testament for China whether China can open or will still perceive as now.
Bitchute, thanks for talking to DW today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Watch out for 1984 in China, especially if they win World War III. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nanosilver gel. It neutralizes pathogens. They'll stay active on your skin for 5 hours. You put it around your mouth, around your nose, lightly coat your nostrils, around your eyes, around your ears, and neutralize pathogens. It can also help heal abrasions, cuts, bruises, minor burns. But you can also put it on acne, and it'll help to heal the acne. It can be used as a skincare product. So please help your skin by keeping it clean, keeping it free of pathogens, and that skin will heal much quicker if it's been damaged. Again, it can be used on abrasions and cuts, minor burns, acne. And if you apply it on your skin, even if you don't have a cut or an abrasion or a bruise or whatever, but you're just using it as a healthy skincare product, put it on at night. When you wake up, exfoliate, and what you'll notice after a few days, your skin is going to be tighter and it's going to be healthier. And if you couple it with the vitamin C and the collagen, and you drink 64 ounces of filtered water, then you're going to start noticing your dermal layer is going to be improving too, especially if you take the resveratrol and the C60. So please go to my store, get the structural nano silver gel as a skincare product and also to help neutralize pathogens. I have a great structural nano silver toothpaste. It's the best toothpaste that you're going to be able to get. It has no fluoride in it. It'll whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, neutralize pathogens, reduce that gum irritation. It'll reduce plaque. And by having good, proper oral hygiene, you're going to reduce cardiovascular disease and valvular disease. So please go to my store, get a few of these tubes of toothpaste and for your family, and you'll be amazed at the high quality of this toothpaste, and it'll help support my work and help support your health. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the toothpaste. To have proper mental clarity, get the clarity factor. It'll help to get those dendrites well maintained and connected, build new connections, get those neurons firing. It'll get rid of that brain fog. You'll have more mental acuity, especially for work or for school. I take it twice a day. Some people only take it once a day. Even if you're retired, take this on a regular basis. And what will happen is you'll be maintaining that mental acuity. Get the clarity factor from my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Now what we're going to do is listen to Times Radio about how Putin will be overthrown if he loses Ukraine.
Some sort of dramatic overthrow of the regime seems to me to be very slight, with one possible exception. If the regime loses the war dramatically, then I suspect the skid are under him. We're still quite a long way away from that.
Evgeny, I'll start with you now. Your husband is also an outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin. Many see him as a real Russian patriot. He's survived poisoning a number of times, but he is sitting behind bars now following his opposition to the war in Ukraine. This must be very frightening for you hearing about the news of Navalny, because your husband is in a not dissimilar position. What was it like for you when you heard the news yesterday?
It is indeed very frightening, not just for me, but for every single family of every single political prisoner in the Russian Federation, because we know what kind of methods are being used by the authorities with regard to those who oppose the official narrative and who are courageous enough to stand tall and say no to the war and no to repression. And these methods include torture, punitive psychiatry, sexual harassment, and Stalin-era prison terms going up to 10, 15 years.
You know what's amazing about her is that she had to read that bullet point as if it's kind of like orchestrated. Now, it's okay if even on a big channel being interviewed and you get something wrong and you correct it, if you catch it, in midstream. It's okay. Just be genuine. But if you have to read regularly bullet points, then you really don't know the subject matter that well. Now, maybe some facts and figures of, a date or, some sort of percentage of some data set or something like that, maybe. But she was literally reading bullet points because you could tell from the way her eye was tracking that it was off to the side. I mean, come on. That's just not, I don't care even if I agree with the bullet points or not. I mean, it should be more free flowing. I don't trust people that read off of teleprompters. And nor should you.
5 years was standing up to the regime. There is a number of Russian political prisoners behind bars today who are there with very serious medical conditions, which puts their lives in danger every single day. So I'm not alone in my fears for my husband's life. And every single person who opposes Vladimir Putin today runs the same risks.
And how is your husband doing? Have you been able to see him? Do you know what his physical health is like at the moment? How long has he been in prison for?
My husband, my husband was detained in April 2022. And in April of 2023, he was sentenced to 25 years of regime.
She's reading
the so-called treason
on a script
based on a few speeches that he made on different international platforms, public speeches that can be easily found online on YouTube. And in these speeches, he talked about repression in Russia, about the need for the Russian population to have access to independent information. He talked about the illegitimate character of Vladimir Putin's rule, and he talked about aggression against Ukraine and the need for the Nuremberg-style tribunal to bring all those responsible to accountability. These speeches, according to the Russian authorities, and that is from the official indictment against my husband, these speeches threatened the national security of the Russian Federation.
Why is she reading off a teleprompter? I mean, it's her husband that's been imprisoned by the Russians. Why? Can't you just say that off the cuff? Something doesn't seem right with her. Now, I'm not saying that, that Putin's good. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, don't you think you could go on any news network, including Times Radio, it's not CNN, and be a little bit more just off the cuff?
And damaged the image of the Russian Federation on the international stage. So anyone who opposes the official narrative in today's Russia is being portrayed by the regime as a criminal, a spy, a traitor, a foreign agent. This is the reality of Vladimir Putin's regime. And my husband, having survived 2 assassination attacks, of course, is...
We also see it in the United States. You go against certain types of agencies, health agencies, or certain government agencies, they'll try to hurt you some way, hurt your credibility, debank you, something, destroy your career. So the nefarious stuff is not just in Russia. The nefarious stuff is also in the United States, especially with individuals trying to explain to the public what was going on during the crisis.
His health leaves a lot to be desired. He has a medical condition as a result of those poisonings, and that condition is deteriorating behind bars.
And have you been able to see him or visit him? Do you have regular contact?
I'm listening to something that is an old recording. This is no, it's not an old recording. This is February No, we're playing the right recording. See, I don't do teleprompter. See, I thought I made a mistake, but I didn't make a mistake. So we're playing the right video here. I was looking at the date, and I was thinking that I was playing something old, but this was published yesterday.
I saw my husband for the last time before his detention in April of 2022. I talked to him for the last time last summer. In December, he was allowed a 15-minute call with the kids. We have 3 children, so 15 minutes divided by 3 means that each kid got 5 minutes to talk to their dad. And this was the first call in over half a year. Now, I was using a timer to make sure that everyone got the 5 minutes. And I could not allow any of my kids to speak for longer than 5 minutes to their father because I could not deprive the other 2 of the possibility.
It's hard to keep up with all the headlines, so let me keep it quick. Every few days, another superpower.
Deprive the other 2 of the possibility to do the same. And it was just our 20th wedding anniversary a couple of days ago. And Vladimir requested a call on this day and was denied. According to the Russian authorities, the 20th wedding anniversary is not an exceptional circumstance that would allow such a call, unlike, for example, death, as they said.
Gosh, I'm so sorry. I mean, it's just unbearable to hear what you and your husband and your children are going through, but you've spoken incredibly powerfully about how difficult life is in Russia and how much the authorities bear down on dissent or protest. We are hearing reports this afternoon, Evgenia, that people, I think more than 250 people now in Russia, have been arrested and detained simply for laying flowers for Navalny, for going to want to commemorate and mourn his death. How worried are you for people in Russia who want to express how they feel about the death of Navalny? Do you think that do you think more people will come out now? And do you worry about what will happen to them?
I know that despite the atrocious repressive methods used by the regime with regard to those people who voice their opposition to what is happening, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago, people have not stopped coming out. And we hear about new detentions and new arrests every single day. People are given harsher and harsher prison sentences. The number of so-called high treason cases is on the rise because these cases can be considered by the court behind closed doors. So even lawyers very often are not allowed in. And human rights defenders only not even know about all the cases of so-called high treason. We know that people are deprived of the right to raise their kids, like Alexei Moskalev and Natalia Filonova, who were both arrested for speaking out against the war in Ukraine, and their kids were taken away from them. We know that punitive psychiatry is being used with regard to people, like in the case of a journalist, Maria Ponomarenko. We know that extreme violence and sexual violence is being used. And despite all that, people continue looking for ways to express their outrage at what is happening. And the fact that people are getting detained for just laying flowers sees how much the regime is afraid of any dissenting voice in society, and how much the reality, the warped image of reality created by Vladimir Putin, in which the entire Russian population stands behind him in the war, how much the reality is different from that image that he is trying to create. Because in order to create that image, he's using increasingly repressive methods against anyone voicing their opposition.
Well, let's bring in Sir Tony Brenton, who's a former British ambassador to Russia. So, Tony, thanks very much for joining us. I mean, just listening to the very powerful testimony there from Evgenia, what do you think this means for any future opposition for President Putin in the future? It seems like he's been utterly ruthless with his critics and opponents. We have the murder of Navalny, we had Prigozhin, who died recently. There are many, many others. Is there any meaningful opposition against Putin now in Russia?
Can I say first, my heartfelt sympathies to Evgenia and to Vladimir, whom I think I met some time ago. It's a terrible situation she's in, and I very much hope that he comes through it in a way that, unfortunately, Alexei Navalny did not. On the state of the opposition in Russia, Evgeny is quite right. There's a steady stream of demonstrations, is overstating it, but signs of opposition to the existing regime. It was quite interesting that a potential opponent to Putin in the presidential campaign arrived, and I thought emerged a few weeks ago, trying to stand on an anti-war ticket, and before he was excluded for technical reasons, large numbers of people were queuing up to give their signatures in support of him. So there's a lot of people out there who know what is going on is wrong and who are prepared to some extent to put their heads above the parapet. Yesterday, one of the moving consequences of Alexei Navalny's death was the appearance of a lot of people. There's a small square beside the FSB headquarters in the center of Moscow, where there is a stone dedicated to the victims of political repression, and a steady stream of people were coming along there and laying flowers. Today, what has happened is the police have come in, they've driven those people away and have cleared the flowers, with apparently a lot of rest. So there is an underlying tremor of opposition to what's going on. But that said, unfortunately, the wider signs are that the Russian people acquiesce in, to some extent, are willing to support what is going on. There are people of the country which is at war, and the instinct of Russia, when it's at war, if it's the people of Russia, is to back their government. Putin still enjoys something like 60% support from the ordinary Russians. So the likelihood of some sort of dramatic overthrow of the regime seems to me to be very slight, with one possible exception. If the regime loses the war dramatically, then I suspect the skids are under him. But we're still quite a long way away from that.
Okay, and just a final question to you briefly, Sir Tony. We've heard David Cameron and others saying Russia must be made to pay, there must be consequences. I mean, Putin has been sanctioned in so many ways after the war in Ukraine. What else can be done from Western countries in terms of consequences?
Well, as you say, yes, we're talking about sanctions. I'm sure we're looking very hard for them. But the fact is that in the course of the war, quite rightly, we've imposed a huge mass of sanctions on Russia already, and there's rather limited scope to do anything further. There are investigations of war crimes trials and all that going on, which may eventuate, if indeed Putin loses the war badly enough. I suspect they will find a few jailers, a few policemen connected with the Navalny case, whom they will sanction. Over and above that, I really find it quite hard to see what they might be able to do.
I don't think that Putin is going to get overthrown. And he is consolidating power, and he's probably not allowing really free elections in this country and allowing for free journalism that's happening, that's for sure. But I don't think he's going to lose spectacularly in Ukraine to the point where there's going to be an overthrow of the government. I think, if anything, he's probably going to maintain the regions that he has taken over, and Ukraine is probably going to be in retreat, not to the point where, you know, the dynamics, I think, are on the Russian side. If you look a few months ago or several months ago, Russia looked like they were on their heels and in a retreating stance, but it's like quite reversed now. And it seems as though it's going to be very problematic for Ukraine, and Ukraine looks like it's going to be losing territory. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on with Ukraine from the BBC perspective.
Zelensky has blamed the fall of Avdiivka, a key town in the east of the country, on a lack of long-range weapons. Kyiv has pulled its forces out after a lengthy battle. Russian troops have been on the offensive around Avdiivka for months, and tonight President Putin has congratulated them for taking complete control of the town. President Zelensky said his soldiers had been outgunned 10-1 and made an urgent appeal for more weapons from the international community. Our correspondent Andrew Harding sent this report from the Donbass region.
Ukrainian troops film themselves as they withdraw from Avdiivka. Exhausted after the longest and perhaps the bloodiest battle of the war so far.
Something's not right
Russian
with this
shells.
video. The guy that on the helmet, I swear it looks like an American flag.
The Donbass region.
It is.
Ukrainian.
It is. Okay, that's an American flag right there. This right here, this Ukraine front line fighting, retreat from Avdiivka, right? This guy right here, that's an American flag sticker or patch, Velcro patch right on the helmet.
Troops film themselves. They withdraw from Avdiivka. Exhausted after the longest and perhaps the bloodiest battle of the war so far. Russian shells still landing close by. In the town centre, a Russian flag is raised. And another on a rooftop in one of the town's industrial areas. The Kremlin is already crowing, releasing footage of Russian fighter jets in action. Air power has played a big role in this victory. On the ground, Ukrainian forces have also been struggling with acute shortages of men and, in particular, of ammunition.
So these are the last 2 shells that you have?
Yes, this artillery officer told us a week ago, blaming Western nations for halting supplies. The result? Ukrainian infantry fighting to hold on to Avdiivka have been heavily outgunned by as much as 10-1. And so, eventually, Ukraine ordered a withdrawal. At times, well organized, but not always. Here, a Ukrainian armored vehicle is hit by a drone. Overall, though, it's Russia that has suffered by far the heaviest losses here.
Russia has suffered 47,000 casualties in Avdiivka since last October. Those are huge losses. In such circumstances, we consider this a successful operation.
Outside Avdiivka, Ukrainian soldiers are already reinforcing new defensive lines and playing down the significance of today's retreat. On its own, the fall of this one small town won't change the course of the war. But again, Russia has shown its sheer determination, its massive firepower, and its willingness to sustain very heavy casualties. And none of that is good news for Ukraine. No wonder towns nearby are nervous.
Every day I think about the future, not only this town, about every town, Pokrovsk, Avdiivka, Konstantinovka, Dnipro, Kyiv.
But they may be next.
Yes.
For now, in Avdiivka, the Russians are once more lords of the rubble. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Eastern Ukraine.
Well, next weekend will mark the 2nd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let's take a closer look at what is happening on the front line in the east of the country. This is what the east looked like in October last year. The large section of pink shows the areas where Russia had full military control. The sections covered in stripes show some Russian control, and then the yellow patches denotes more recent Russian advances. And if we look at the same map today, we can see how the front line has changed. The pink has engulfed the stripes, and those yellow sections have expanded significantly. In other words, Russian troops are advancing westwards. Let's return to Andrew Harding in eastern Ukraine. And so what does today's news from that region mean for the wider war, Andrew?
Good evening, Jane. So if you look at the big picture, I think it's clear that both the Russians and the Ukrainians now realize that this is going to be a very long war, no possibility really of a quick breakthrough. You may remember that last year, Ukraine launched that big counter-offensive with a lot of Western weapons, Western tanks and so on. It failed. It took back almost no territory, largely because the Russians had dug in and put so many minefields in their path. Then you've had a bit of a stagnant period for the last month or two, and now the Russians are having essentially their turn at trying to break through Ukrainian lines. They're not making huge progress, but they are trying now, not just in Avdiivka, but other places north of here, to break through. The Ukrainians have made it clear that they are going to dig in and try and make sure the Russians suffer huge losses in the coming months. And then the Ukrainian hope is that they'll get more Western weapons, including long-range missiles and including perhaps fighter jets. And then they, at some point, perhaps later this year or even next year, will have another go at trying to reclaim all the territory that's still under Russian control.
Let's be real. Life can get tough, to say the least, and especially without someone to talk to. And as men, this topic seems to be brushed off.
All right, so that's what's going on with Ukraine. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the probiotic. I have two different types of probiotic. The one I have in my hand is the powdered one. You mix it with your food. And the other one is a capsule form, where you just pop it in your mouth and you don't have to mix it with your food. So please go to my store and get the probiotics that I offer. You need a good gut biome, and you get that by taking a high quality probiotic. And it's part of the anti-aging protocol. Why? Because you need proper absorption in your gut, you need a healthy gut. You want to try to prevent colon issues and colon cancers, and you want to have a good metabolism, and there's a communication between your gut and your liver. So by having a good gut biome, you're going to increase your metabolism, and you're going to be healthier, and you're going to have more consistent stools. So please go to my store and get the probiotics that I offer to maintain a good gut biome. Also, please go to my store and get the multivitamin that I offer. This multivitamin supplement is easy to digest. And not only that, it has the cofactors. The minerals and the vitamins that are in this are cofactors for certain types of enzymes. And if you don't have enough of these cofactors, those enzymes aren't going to work as properly. So your metabolism isn't going to be as well. And therefore, your immune system isn't going to be as well. And your body is going to be subpar. But by taking a good multivitamin, you're going to have those cofactors that have the proper enzymatic activity, so you can have the proper metabolism and the proper immune system. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the multivitamin that I offer that's easy to digest. Those are just some of the products that I offer on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description. I also have this new module that I teach you pulmonology. I have 22 lectures. It has 22 PDFs that you can download and 22 individual video lectures going over those PowerPoints to teach you different systems for the pulmonary area. All right, I teach you the embryology of the pulmonary system, the anatomy of the pulmonary system, different types of diseases, how they're treated, x-rays, and other radiological scans. You are going to learn a lot about pulmonology. All right, the whole point of the module, of these classes for only $50. You get all this for $50, and you can watch the videos multiple times, and you can download the PDFs. When you buy the module for $50, you'll get a code to be able to get into the area that where the classes are on the website. All right. So you get a lot for $50. Each day I upload a new lecture. There's 11 lectures up there right now. There'll be a total of 22. And then after that, I will start releasing another module about on the system of the human body. Why do you get this? One, to challenge your brain. Another, to learn about science and medicine. And to be a citizen scientist. Be more discerning. We need to build the base so you understand what mainstream media is saying and how you can say, no, I disagree because of this, this, and this. All right. You may have a gut feeling to not believe what mainstream media is, but do you really know why? Scientifically, why? Many people don't. On the top of that, by being a citizen scientist, you're going to be able to discern actually research that's being published. When research is published, there's pluses and minuses to the research. So if you get a broader knowledge base, you'll be able to discern what is accurate, what is inaccurate, what has more validity and less validity. And you'll understand the nuance of the research. But you can only get that if you put the time in and learn. Many people do not have a scientific background, and many people don't understand how the human body really works. They think they know, but they really don't. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and sign up for the pulmonology module. I'll be releasing more modules in due time, and you will learn a lot about pulmonology for only $50. Thank you for supporting my work, and have a nice day.